So for the sake of the recording, in case we start it right here, take a more official opportunity to say welcome to everybody. Glad everyone's here. Today's speaker, Erin Shaw, software engineer at MailChimp, is going to give us a little bit of insight around her experience with coding boot camps and what it's like to be an engineer on her team right now. I'm personally very curious about this topic because I work in tech, but I am not a developer myself. And I have been very intrigued at what the payoff might be, if it's worth putting myself through some kind of boot camp, and what that track in my career might look like. So without further ado, Erin, thank you for being here. It's great to meet you, and I look forward to hearing what you might have to say.
Thanks so much. Okay, let's see. Just to get started, I wanted to do a little bit of an introduction and an overview of how I got here as a software engineer at MailChimp. In particular, I work on the data services team there, and I help build the libraries and infrastructures that MailChimp uses to internally track events in our product. But it's a little bit of a strange turn for me, especially given my background. I actually have a bachelor's degree in American history, completely non-technical, from the University of Chicago. And then after that, I decided to pursue a career as an archivist. And I attended New York University to acquire a master's degree in history and archival administration. Soon after my graduation, I got a job working as an archivist and corporate historian at JPMorgan Chase, but I really didn't enjoy the work. It didn't feel challenging enough for me. It didn't feel rewarding. Like there was a lot of career opportunity for me to advance or to move laterally, to change positions. It's not a field that has a lot of opportunity. So in 2016, I decided to officially transition and give a career in tech a chance. So I spent about 6 months studying coding part-time, just really the basics, you know, variables, loops, functions, like the real building blocks of any coding language, really. But I decided to start in JavaScript. And after 6 months, I applied to the Grace Hopper program at Full Stack Academy in New York City, and attended that program in July 2017. And after finishing that program, I was selected to stay on as a teaching assistant for the next group of women in the cohort that followed mine. After that, I actually spent another 3 months at a program called the Recurse Center, which is a completely free coding retreat for programmers in New York City. After that, actually during my time at the Recurse Center, I was able to find a job at a company called Welcome Software, which initially was called NewsCred at the time. But all in all, I spent 11 months from the time that I started the boot camp to the time I started my first coding job. So not a small amount of time at all. And just a few caveats before I kind of get started on this talk. The first being that this field changes really fast, and the coding bootcamp landscape is a lot different from when I was in it almost 5 years ago. At the time, 5 years ago, or soon after I graduated, I would have absolutely not recommended anyone outside of San Francisco or New York City to attend a boot camp. There just wasn't enough job opportunity, I felt, in these smaller cities like Atlanta, Austin, Nashville are some of the ones I've heard of people going to. I just was concerned about the job opportunity then, but kind of now that we're in kind of a not quite post-COVID, but post the realities of COVID world, I think remote opportunities are here to stay, and that really opens up the field a lot more. Let's see. So before I get started onto boot camps, I just wanted to quickly go over what are the 3 traditional tracks that you have to kind of approach getting a position as a software engineer. I think the most traditional and the most common that people know about is just going for that computer science degree. So that's a 4-year program. Within it, you really learn the foundational material of computer science and like data structures, algorithms. I know a lot of programs tend to teach Java or C++ or other languages that aren't usually used in my field in web development, but are very desirable in a lot of places. But often they can be a little bit more theoretical and a little less practical. It's not necessarily learning the skills, languages, libraries that are really quote unquote hot at the moment. The second is the coding boot camp, which is what I did and I'm focusing on today, which is normally a 3-month program. I know that these kind of differ in length nowadays. There are other options, but that's kind of the traditional length of time. And it focuses more on skills needed to quickly get a job. In my case, at Full Stack Academy, they taught full stack JavaScript. So we were learning a library called React.js for front-end development and a back-end library called Node.js written in JavaScript. And this tends to be more practical, less theoretical. The last option, which is, in my mind, by far the most difficult, is self-taught. So you kind of teach yourself on your own time. You use materials available online or in textbooks. And you kind of are able to select your own coursework. You can kind of figure out what sort of path you want to take, but it's pretty difficult to know exactly what to do. But at the same time, the internet is practically limitless with resources, free or practically free, to pursue it. Just very quickly, some pros and cons of each approach. Computer science degree, you're going to get a strong foundation, so long as you study well, of algorithms and data structures. These are the sort of skills that pretty much any software engineering job is going to want to see and will test you on in the interview process. You're going to get guidance from professors, from TAs. You're definitely going to have mentorship there. And I would say of the people that are vying for entry-level software engineering positions, those who have computer science degrees tend to have a leg up on other candidates. It's seen as slightly more desirable. It's a much bigger commitment. For coding boot camps, a great benefit is that you're actually learning the applicable coding skills that you'll very likely use on a job. So for example, I learned React.js, which is the front-end library to build websites. And in my next job, I was immediately using it. I didn't really have to spend a lot of time learning what the company did. I just kind of got into developing immediately. Also, any coding bootcamp worth attending is going to have a career team, and they're going to help you and support you in your pursuit of the job. And it's also less of a time commitment. You know, like a 4-year program is a huge time commitment. A 3-month program is going to be a lot less time. And just for self-taught, really quickly, it's going to be free or very cheap, whatever the resources you want to use online charge, which tends to be not so bad. You really get to select a path that interests you, and there are just, as I said, limitless resources online. And very quickly, just cons for each of them as well. As I mentioned, computer science degree, that's a huge time commitment, expensive. Undergraduate degrees are wildly expensive nowadays. You're not always going to learn the applicable skills that you need to quickly start working in a job. For example, most universities aren't teaching JavaScript like in their foundational courses. They're not teaching Git and other tools that generally we're using day to day on the job. And actually, sometimes computer science graduates go to boot camps. And when I was in a boot camp, I actually had a number of computer science graduates who were in it with me who didn't feel like they had learned enough at school to get a job. That's kind of, I think, probably the worst of all worlds, because then you have to pay for both. The coding boot camp, some cons to doing it this way. It's an incredibly fast-paced learning environment, which is not going to be great for every type of learner. There were a lot of people who I think could have succeeded very well in a coding boot camp had it been twice as long, but because of constraints and time, or however the schools decide to structure these programs, they kind of flounder. They need more time to study it. And in general, because you're spending so little time learning so many concepts, it's really kind of a shallow understanding of many of these concepts. For you to really be able to grok them and truly understand them well, you're going to have to spend time outside of the boot camps learning them as well, understanding them better. Also, there's a lot of competition for jobs. As I mentioned, computer science grads tend to be more desired for positions than coding bootcamp grads. So it tends to be a pretty big struggle often to find a job outside of the program. It's also really expensive. I mean, it's not as expensive generally as a four-year program, but I mean, back in 2017, my program was $19,000. And that's about what I paid for my undergraduate degree. A lot of them have opportunities for, like, for example, a lot of them have opportunities for financing. Like, for example, there are a lot where you don't have to pay until you get a job. The one I did was like that. And once I had a job, I did a payment program for 9 months to pay the rest of it off. But yeah, it's not a small cost. It's a huge amount of money to be investing. And also, there tends to be an inconsistent quality of learning. A lot of, I think the coding boot camps are varying levels of quality. So you want to make sure you're finding one with a good reputation, but also even in ones that are of higher quality, sometimes you just kind of get a dud of a teacher, you know, like a lot of times they're sourcing these teachers from boot camp grads. So you're getting people who know the material, but sometimes don't have that much more experience than you do. I had teachers at my boot camp who had graduated from the boot camp and then became teachers soon thereafter and really hadn't actually yet worked as a software engineer at a company. They'd only learned the material and then started teaching other people the material. And then lastly, very quickly, self-taught. I mean, you're lacking a lot of structure. You might not know where to start, what to do, what to focus on. There's no guidance. There's no mentorship, which is incredibly important during this learning process. There's no career assistance, really. I would say, in my opinion, self-taught is the most difficult approach. So just really quickly to kind of go over what my experience at a coding bootcamp looked like and how it was structured. And of course, just remembering my caveat that these things do change and they can vary from bootcamp to bootcamp. Mine was really broken up into 2 semesters. The first semester was really the education phase of the bootcamp. We went through a very basic study of like the most common data structures and algorithms. We studied Node.js. We did a little bit of HTML, CSS, jQuery, and then we studied React.js. And we had tests that would kind of make sure we were still on track throughout the first phase. And then at the end, we had to pass a kind of a cumulative exam to make sure we had enough knowledge to move on to the second half of the coding bootcamp. And I kind of call that portion the application. We spend the second half just trying to build things to really solidify what we had learned in the first half and also to expand our knowledge of those things. So at my bootcamp, we built an e-commerce project, an e-commerce website as a group. There was one individual kind of hackathon project over the course of 4 days that you did entirely on your own and then presented to your cohort. And then finally, there was a group capstone project, which is kind of the largest project that you build. You spent the most time on this, and this was supposed to be, in some ways, a part of the kind of the biggest star of your portfolio when you started going out looking for jobs. This was the project that you were supposed to be able to point to as like indicative of your work. So a lot of people do a lot of different things. Sometimes people make online versions of popular games. Like someone in my cohort made an online version of the board game Pandemic. Funny enough, I don't know if that game's still popular or not, but it was fun back in the day. My group and I thought it would be fun to try to create a dating app that matched you with people based on your similarity in music type. So you'd connect your Spotify account, and then you would be matched with other users who had the most similar musical tastes as you, just as kind of a sample. So after all that, there are a few questions you should probably ask yourself if you're thinking about attending a boot camp that are absolutely vital. And the first is, do you have the financial stability and support for the possibility of 6 or more months of unemployment? It's very common. If you're doing a full-time program, you're not going to be able to work during it. It's really tough. The technical hours were 9 to 5, but pretty much every day I got there early and I left late, especially at the second portion of the class or second portion of the program. When I'm doing a lot of project-based work, I would stay really late working on those projects. So it's probably not possible to maintain a job under those circumstances. I also studied on the weekends as well. And generally, if you're real talk, if you're lucky, you'll find a job within 3 months. But generally, it's a 3 to 6 month search, at least, which can be a real financial burden. The other question you should ask is, like, what's your learning style? Do you think you could handle a fast-paced learning environment? As I mentioned, there are boot camps now that extend the amount of time. There are 6-month boot camps, a lot of part-time boot camps that are in the evening that you can balance actually with a job, are over more time because you can't do it full time. But in general, if you're spending all your time doing this, do you feel comfortable with learning that quickly? Also, have you already spent time building a foundation for coding knowledge? Like, there really isn't, you can't be over prepared for a coding boot camp. You really need to know the foundations and more. And so anytime that you can spend before attending a boot camp, making sure you're familiar with these things and really, really know the fundamentals, the foundations, is going to be really vital. Next, you want to make sure you're able to attend a boot camp with a good reputation. There are a lot of boot camps in the market these days, and you get wildly different reputations within them. So it's important not just to believe the marketing that any single boot camp is going to give you, but make sure that you're verifying it with actual data and actual reviews from students. So just very briefly, I wanted to share, actually that's next, I'll do that in a second, sorry. And I think most importantly, like, do you actually like to code? Because I've seen people who are like, oh, I hear like that, you know, you can make decent money, and like as a software engineer, maybe I should do that. And I always ask, like, well, do you like doing it? Have you tried it? Because you really have to enjoy doing it or you're not going to learn it. I mean, you're like, when you're in the depths of the slog and you don't think you can push past, and you're really doubting whether or not you can actually learn this material. Like, if you don't enjoy doing it, you're just not going to be able to push through that struggle. So before you make the commitment of going to a boot camp, which is, as I mentioned, can usually be a pretty big financial commitment, really make sure you like it. Spend a lot of time with it. As I mentioned, you can't over prepare for these boot camps. So that if you kind of pass all these tests and you're pretty sure you still want to move forward with this, you want to know, like, how do I select a boot camp? So back in my day, excuse me, when I was looking, really the only boot camps that really existed were web development boot camps. So that means learning JavaScript for front-end development, and then learning a back-end language like Python, Ruby, or Java. And that was really the bread and butter. But now the field has opened up a lot. I see a lot of boot camps for data analysts. So you're going to learn Python. You're going to learn how to manipulate and create data reports, cybersecurity, and then still web development as well. So these are very, very different types of professions. They're very different types of skills. And you should be sure which one you might want to focus on, because they're not transferable. If you go to a boot camp for data analysis or cybersecurity, you're not necessarily going to be able to get a web development job, and vice versa. And secondly, you want to make sure you're researching the reputation of the boot camps they're interested in. So a few resources, and I'll be sure to share them after as well, is the Council on Integrity and Results Reporting. So that is this website, CIRR.org. And so kind of because of a lot of hucksterism, a lot of kind of fraudulent programs that started popping up, a group of boot camps got together to create a organization that helps audit and report on the actual outcomes for students in these boot camps. So it's generally pretty good to check out whether the boot camp you're interested in has a report. Like, I think there was only actually one for Atlanta, one called Digital Crafts, but you can look it up, and each one is going to have an audited report, just one page, that kind of describes for a certain amount of time how many students graduate from the program, what are the results of the graduation and percentages for that, what is the median annual base salary of these graduates, and then what's the most frequent job title. So it's pretty important to see, because you might see that in a certain boot camp, the salary is a lot lower, or the graduation rate is really low, or, you know, after 180 days, there were still a lot of students who hadn't gotten a job. So if you're looking at a boot camp and they happen to be a part of CIRR, you really want to kind of take a look at this and make sure you understand what are the results for students who come out of that program. And more so than what they advertise on their website, because this is actually verified and audited by a third party. They can put anything they want on their website, really. I mean, they can they can kind of massage the data as much as they want. The second resource I would really suggest, and one that's been around for quite a while, I even used it, is called Course Report. And this is a really great resource for understanding what boot camps are out there, and also reviews. So you can select one, and it'll give you an overview of the program. And also you can read reviews of students who've attended, which I think is really important, because you kind of want to hear their voices. Like, what did they like about the program? What didn't they like about the program? I think even the best coding boot camps are going to have criticisms, and it's good to know what those weaknesses are ahead of time before you make that commitment. It's probably going to be okay if they have weaknesses, but good to know them ahead of time. It can't hurt. And it looks like they've expanded a lot of their offerings since I last used it, and they can help you browse, get matched, research as well. So another really great resource. I would also make sure you understand what's their tuition payment structure. So some programs require you pay everything up front. Some require or have the option of doing a payment plan once you become employed. Sometimes those are different costs. Sometimes they'll charge you less if you pay up front than if you pay after you get a job. Pretty much all of them are going to require a deposit. Importantly, like back in 2017 when I went, I had to put down $3,000, which was quite a chunk of change for me. So it's important to understand there's going to be, even with a deferred tuition plan, there's usually a financial investment you have to make. Also, I mean, this is pretty basic, but what languages do they teach? Have you been working with those languages? Are they ones you want to learn? How comfortable are you with them? And lastly, what's their admission process? So for the program I did, essentially the process was I filled out an application online where I talked about my experience, why I wanted to attend, why I wanted a career in tech. I moved on to the next level and took a hour-long coding assessment, coding problem. It was about 5 coding problems that I had to solve within a certain amount of time. I did well enough on that to do a face-to-face interview over Skype, where I was interviewed by a current TA in the program. And then we worked through a couple coding problems together, kind of like a pair programming, if you've heard that word before. And then after that, I was told whether or not I was accepted into the program. So that's a pretty rigorous application process, but I wouldn't shy away from these difficult application processes. I wouldn't be lured into easy ones because they often aren't rigorous programs. The ones that tend to admit students very easily tend to be the ones that are a little bit more of a cash grab. You really want to try to push yourself to go to the ones that have the most rigorous standards for admission. And so, yeah, let's see. So how do you get started? Really start coding. I would put resources here that I use to get started myself, but pretty much none of them exist anymore. It's a field that changes really, really quickly. Yeah, I can't with confidence suggest anything anymore. One that does still exist is Code Academy. That's when I started off back in the day. But again, this was almost 6 years ago. And the second thing I would do is try to get in touch with alumni of programs you might be interested in. You can try searching maybe on LinkedIn to see people who attended the boot camp you're interested in attending. It's good to see, you know, what are they doing now? What kind of companies are they working for? What's their job title? And if you are able to connect with them and have a one-on-one chat and kind of see what their experience was, that can be really helpful in informing whether it's a good program for you. I wouldn't be shy about reaching out. The worst is that they say no, but pretty much anyone who reaches out to me on LinkedIn and says, I'm interested in doing this, can you give me some advice? I say yes to. So I would definitely give that a thought. One last thing I wanted to mention that's not really a boot camp, but is something that might interest some of you, is the last program that I did after I finished my boot camp TA, which was called the Recurse Center. So it is a program with space in New York City, but since the pandemic, they've been doing all remote. It's totally free, and it's they kind of describe themselves as a writer's retreat for programmers. So it tends to attract people who already have quite a bit of practical, educational, or job experience programming, but they did admit me without any of that. You do need to know how to code, but otherwise, as long as you pass the interview, they'll let you in. And I wasn't even the least experienced programmer at the time I went. And so just very briefly, this is kind of like a place for you to really select what you're going to learn. There's no curriculum, group curriculum. There's no real requirements for how you spend the time. It's really built around the foundation that we know what interests us and what we want to learn, and they try to make the space for you to be able to do that. So you might wonder, like, well, what's the difference between doing that and just studying on my own? Well, back in the day, you would get this really great office space with other people to learn from. But now that it's all online, really what you're getting is access to a lot of people who would be interested in mentoring you. So everyone's got their own projects, their own things that they want to learn. But at the same time, everyone's helping each other. So when I was there, I was obviously very new. I couldn't really teach too many people new things, but a lot of people with a lot of experience were able to teach me a lot. Like, for example, I was able to receive mentorship from software engineers who had worked at Facebook and Google and Amazon and other companies as well. And really getting that experience with a programmer who's much more experienced than you is really a great way to level up. They have a lot of initiatives for hiring people who are underrepresented in tech, which I think a lot of the people involved in Rep Code would fall under that category. So if that sounds interesting, that's another option, because unlike the boot camps, it is entirely free. Okay, so that's really all I had for today. If you want to get in contact with me, I'm happy to talk more about anything. Of course, I'll do questions after this as well, but you can email me at erin.shaw@mailchimp.com, or you can find me at LinkedIn.
Thank you, Erin. So much information to process. I particularly appreciated the one question you had on one of your slides that said, importantly, do you like coding? And the reason for that is because I work in a team culture where a lot of people think, well, I definitely want to go do this thing. I want to be an engineer. And the answer is, well, of course, I'm gonna do the boot camp thing, and I'm going to pursue this career track. But they don't necessarily ask themselves if they really like to do it. So the really good food for thought. And I have a question to ask in a little bit, but I definitely want to open up the floor for anybody on the call that has follow-up questions, things that may have stirred in their minds while Erin was sharing. Follow-up questions on boot camps, follow-up questions on the risk in going in one direction or another, on what her specific experience of it was while she was in it. Just want to open the floor up for that.
Thank you so much, Erin. It was bootcamp have been a major topic for me as a CS student recently. As you mentioned earlier, school and the CS program does not teach practical and a practical experience, and they focus mainly on theoretical, on how programs work, but they don't necessarily show us how the program would be coded or would be made. And I have a question about like boot camps. As a graduate of boot camp, would I be treated if I say like I would go to a boot camp and I enjoy coding and but would I be treated as a boot camp graduate when I get hired? And if I graduated from boot camp, would the decision of the job interview and getting me on board would be different from being a computer science graduate.
Hmm. Yeah, I think I'm curious how it is now. It might have changed because I know just the amount of jobs in tech are just booming. I know they're generally in mid-level, but there's a lot of need that needs to be filled. So I think there is, I won't lie, I do think there is like a slight stigma or at least I think a lot of companies think they know what hiring a bootcamp grad is going to be like. I, for example, was hired at my company, and then when we were looking for new positions, I kind of saw firsthand like how some candidates who were bootcamp grads who weren't chosen to move on. Sometimes I had spoken to them because they were alumni of the same program and I had referred them or spoke to them. And I watched them on LinkedIn just like killing it. You know what I mean? Like,
Awesome.
like they're getting great jobs. They're really, you know, they're really big. They're speaking at conferences, you know, they're moving up. And I sometimes I thought to myself, like, darn, like this company really missed out on this person, you know, like they were so bright and sharp and they found an opportunity for them to really take off. On the other hand, I had the experience too of starting the same week as a bootcamp grad with someone who was a CS grad. And we both had a lot of on-ramping to do, but I think it was actually slightly easier for me because, you know, as you said, you're not necessarily learning HTML, CSS, Git, JavaScript at universities, and he had to learn all of that from scratch. So I was actually contributing to the team quicker and then at a larger quantity than he was. I mean, he had a lot of really great skills and he was really eager to learn and he knew how to learn really well because he had been doing this in school. But he was, you know, he's kind of coming with nothing, like no web development experience really at all.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Certainly. Thank you so much. I'm going to open any questions for the rest of the guys.
Great question, Malek.
Thank you.
I have a question, Aaron, around maybe you're not able to speak to this, but around the financial aspect of it. Personally, I'm a father of two girls. I have responsibilities, and I know there's absolutely no way that I can, at this point in my life, maybe things will change in the future, but at this point in my life, I know there's no way that I could be unemployed and not generate revenue and still provide for the needs of my family. So that even if I did love coding and I checked all the other boxes, I know that that wouldn't be an option right now. Do you know if there are any kind of programs that subsidize the cost of the boot camp or have any kind of special scholarships accessible? And what does that look like? But then also, does it kind of overlap with what you mentioned around the legitimacy of the boot camp that you're trying to attend on, and if it has a good reputation or not?
Yeah, I can only really speak to when I was looking into this material now quite a few years ago. But for example, I applied for a full scholarship to a program called Hack Reactor, which has a number of locations throughout the US and I think online as well. So that would have been no tuition paid, really awesome, but that's not a life stipend, right? You're still generating zero money. You just don't also have to pay for this enormous expense as well. Let's see. I would say time commitment wise, the there are programs that are part-time, so they're after work. You do have to pay for them, obviously, but you also can do, they're structured so that you can do a 9 to 5. I mean, a lot of those, I TA'd with those students sometimes, like when I was working as a TA at Grace Hopper, and like, wow, they had so much grit. I mean, they were doing it like 2 or 3 times during the week, and then like almost like a full day, like every Saturday or every other Saturday. And it's just like, oh my gosh, you know, like that's a lot. It's just a lot to balance. I, for one, like even without kids, like I, for one, struggled a lot without like the emotional and to an extent financial support of my partner. And like being able to learn that material after working a full day's work, just like, wow. It's really, really impressive. But you know, there are other advantages to that as well. You're also, it's a 6-month program instead of a 3-month program, so you're getting more time to really sit with the material, kind of work with it. There are a few advantages of that as well. It's something I definitely considered doing myself. Oh, that's great. Thanks, Grace. Apparently Thinkful also has a living stipends. I would say too, the program I mentioned that's not a boot camp is already free, but is more unstructured. The Recurse Center does, you can apply for living stipends if you kind of match certain criteria as like someone who is underrepresented in tech. They try to save a certain amount of money to help people attend that as well.
Thank you. If anybody else, you know, while we have access to Erin here on the Zoom call, take advantage. Ask any questions you may have. She was kind enough to make herself available with her LinkedIn profile and her email, but this is a great opportunity to ask a follow-up question in person.
How would you describe the time commitment while you're in the program? Is it eat, sleep, code, or did you find a good work-life balance? Or what could someone expect going into a coding boot camp?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think it really depends. I knew some people, I mean, I went, in my program, there were mothers, so they would just do the program, and then, you know, they had to go home and take care of their kids. So they definitely were managing their time much differently than I was. But yeah, it's kind of easy code. It kind of feels like you can always study more, and you kind of have to decide for yourself like your limits. For me, I was like, I need to make sure I'm still exercising. So these days a week, I'm gonna stop at 5 so I can go to the gym. Or like, I need to make sure I have at least 1 day off a week to spend, you know, time with loved ones. So I don't work on Sundays, you know. But Saturdays I usually would, at least for half the day, if not the whole day. And that's completely outside of the actual class time. And as I mentioned as well, I tended to try to get there early, and I tended to leave late. So that was a personal choice, but at the very least, you're looking at 9 to 5, Monday through Friday for most programs that are full-time. And also, if anyone doesn't want to unmute and ask a question, if they feel more comfortable typing it in the chat, I'm happy to answer from there as well.
I actually have a second question if everyone is okay. So and like they speak a lot, like I have a software engineer friend, and he speaks a lot about, like how they use math in certain programs to do certain things, for instance, like loops, and how, if and while loop works. But speaking of boot camps, like I took 5 classes in school up to this level. And like there are some thoughts about, boot camps, like would a boot camp teach me how to use mathematic, and in like mathematic in general, and like mathematic in
Mm.
code? Would it be like 3 months a good, like a good time, or enough time for me to learn all the skills, like mathematic skills?
I mean, full disclosure, I never went past pre-calculus.
Oh, okay, okay. This is great.
I mean, I would say that is a general conception, right, of programming, that you need to be really good at math. I don't think I'm bad at math, but when I was in undergrad, I just didn't think I wanted to pursue science or technology, so I didn't really make an effort to go that far in it. For web development, you need like almost like none, like the
Okay.
sort of things that you I mean, this is very different depending on what type of software engineer you are. There are some like positions where you're going to really, really need that skill. But in general, web development, no,
You don't necessarily need any
not
mathematic
necessarily.
skills.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Gotcha. Well, that answers my question. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I will say, and one thing I actually probably will hopefully do one day is, I've heard discrete math is actually really great for software engineering. It's very applicable.
I actually took it last semester. It was
Oh,
an
neat.
open-minding. It was an open-minding, but it was like more theoretical foundation of computer science rather than like just math. And the professor was not like, she did not give us like, okay, so like how this related to, programming, and how this
Mhm.
related to science. And she started explaining about like trees, and how trees works, and how we calculate trees, and how stack works, and how
Mhm.
discrete mathematic is related to this specific, you know type of coding. So
Yeah.
I cannot, like, I have a theoretical, kind of experience, but I did not have hands-on experience. I started with Ref Code like 1 week ago, and I've told Brenton, I've learned so much more than what I did learn in the past, like 2 semesters, attending Java courses, which is great. Like I'm a hand-on experience type of
Mhm.
learner. I need to see like the practical aspect of the, anything I'm learning. So this has been a great experience for me.
Yeah, that's great. I know, yeah, I think the only software engineer I can really think of that's incredibly math intensive, my fiance is a machine learning engineer, and that is like an obscene amount of math.
Yes,
But
I've heard that.
people aren't going to become machine learning engineers right out of boot camp or even an undergraduate degree,
Absolutely.
really. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And Malek, what you're referring to touches on what Aaron mentioned earlier about coding boot camps or environments feeling a little bit more practical and less theoretical in their education. But I feel the tension even as I heard her presenting on it, because there is such a value add to showing a future employer your college degree, right?
Absolutely.
It's a very unique value add. But then also, I the more I learn about some of these coding intensives and boot camps, there's another part of my brain that thinks, well, if you can do it with this, do you maybe
Yes.
both is good, but maybe just one is.
Yes, yes. I actually I know, like I know 3 or 4 computer science grad, which something Erin mentioned earlier, who graduated with computer science degree and went to a boot camp, they graduated with zero experience, and they were not able to get a hold on an interview when they graduated from a computer science program until they actually went through boot camp and that graduated boot camp. So both of them together is a great, it gives a great experience, hands-on experience plus, theoretical experience.
Yeah, but wow, the cost,
Oh, the cost, yes.
Yeah.
The cost is way too expensive. Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to go ahead, and if nobody else has anything else, I'll go ahead and give a little reaction round of applause here. If everybody knows how to use your reaction emojis for Aaron. Really appreciate you shedding a little bit of your experiential insight on what this has been like. For everybody else, it's worth noting that as COVID hopefully comes to a slow close, we're going to do a few more tech talks, but there is news to come on how we want Ref Code to give you access to more of this practical experience, just like Malek was just referring to, how in just the last week, he's experienced a lot more hands-on than the last year or so in some other environments. And so some of it may be more coding focused, other of it may actually encourage you and inspire you to look at other aspects of technology to see if that's a line that you want to step into. And so please stay tuned. We want to continue to provide as much access and to hands-on opportunity, to practical learning, and to the community itself, so that we can have access to one another, strengthen these relationships, and ask a lot of these more insightful questions. So thank you again, Aaron, for being here. Thank you, everybody, for being here as well. We will have this recording as well for other people to listen to in the future. So I will go ahead and
I do have just a few more closing thoughts, if it's okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So next week, my former MailChimp colleague, he was on the same team as me in data services, JP, is presenting, and I'm excited to see what he's going to present. So I hope to see you all there next week as well. And I've given this talk now at Ref Code, but I'm also available as a mentor here. I haven't entirely figured out what remote mentors, how they engage with the Ref Code community, but maybe now is a great time to figure that out as we're all remote. So feel free to reach out to me on the Slack if you want to talk about anything technical or otherwise, and I'm happy to make myself available there as well.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for your time. It's very all the information was provided in this talk was very helpful, and thank you so much for making yourself available for all the further questions. I'm sure that we will have a ton of questions for you, and I'm very grateful we made that connection.
Yes, well.
Thank you, everybody. Aaron, thank you once again. And thank you for making yourself continuously available to everybody here. Well, you are on the Ref Code Slack channel. So anybody, feel free to reach out to her or I with any follow-up questions. I personally will not be able to make it next week, but I will see everybody the week after on February 23rd.
Thank you very much.
See you all around.
Yeah, thank you.